Good evening. It's great to see so many of you here, and particularly so many students here. From the days when I used to teach, it's amazing what extra credit would do. It's amazing what extra credit does. It makes them show up for anything. Welcome to Concordia's Jacobson lecture. I want to really start out by thanking Bronxville resident and longtime Concordia friend Sean Coffey. As chair of Kramer Levin's complex litigation group, Sean has built an impressive track record as one of America's most successful trial lawyers. He's a decorated naval officer, retired after 30 years of service, and today he continues his commitment to serving others by serving in so many boards. Sean served with Neera Tanden as Democratic surrogates for a 2012 presidential debate on domestic and foreign policy at Harvard Business School before that election year. Which brings us to this evening. As you know, in life, it all depends who you know. I've always wanted Neera to come to campus, but I couldn't get through her front door. But Sean was kind enough to get her to come over to campus. As a matter of fact, I told Neera if it had been for another day, I would have cooked her a great meal at home. But that did not work out. So, Sean, as a thoughtful and generous friend of the college, we really want you to know that we appreciate your connection and opening that door for us. So without further ado, Sean will introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome students, faculty, and fellow neighbors here in Bronxville. It's my pleasure to introduce a fabulous, fabulous woman, thinker, public policy advocate, Neera Tanden. It's such a pleasure to have her here. I guarantee you, when you leave here tonight, you will have been intrigued, challenged, and hopefully inspired. Because for all of us who are so frustrated with what goes on in Washington, one step removed from the public elected officials, there are people who day in and day out still believe that if you get the data and you fashion the arguments, good policy can ultimately win out, despite the evidence to the contrary. No, just kidding. They are trying to do it. And Neera is the CEO of the Center for American Progress, which I've been proud to support since almost its initiation. And it's progressive, but it's a nonpartisan, but progressive, policy think tank that is trying to come up with innovative ways to address some of the problems, virtually all the problems that we face. And I met Neera shortly after she took over in 2011. The CAP had been founded by John Podesta, who left to go be counselor to President Obama, remains chair of the board. So you're going to hear from someone who thinks the big thoughts. And what she's going to talk about tonight is an emerging big thought, big issue, which is economic inequality. The recession, they tell us, is behind us. It's been behind us for 4 years, so say the statistics. But a lot of folks aren't participating in that, and even those of us who are well off, many of us are concerned about that and what it means for the future of our country. Neera and I are both children of immigrants, and this country has been very, very good to us. We've had great opportunities, and many of us are concerned that maybe that ladder isn't as available as it should be. So I think you're going to hear a lot that you may disagree with or stimulate you, but you will be stimulated. So I think the plan is to speak for about 15 minutes, and then, prep those tough questions for Neera, because when we were on that debate together, I kept deferring to her, because these questions were very hard, and she was the one who was able to answer them. So without further ado, my good friend Neera Tanden. Thank you.
So I am really honored to be here and to talk about some of the challenges I think the country is facing around economics and economic growth. And I'm really honored to be here with so many students, because when we talk about the future of our country and the future of economic growth in the country. We're really talking about your futures. And so I'm interested in really hearing from you. So I will talk for a little bit, not the length of a normal lecture, just a little bit so that I can also hear from you and get your questions, because I also learned so much as I talk about these issues. I really want to thank Sean, who has been a great friend, and I will honestly say that he won the debate for us. So he's very modest, but he's an excellent debater and has debated for a long time. And that's probably why he's such a great trial lawyer. So I'm really honored to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. I don't really remember it that Sean opened the door, but I'm really honest. I'm really honored to be here. So I'm going to talk about a few issues that I think are connected, and at first, you may not see the connection, but I hope to make it clear by the end of my talk. So my talk is about the Boss Lottery and winning the Boss Lottery. And what I mean by that is that on an important scale of issues that disproportionately affect women, but really affect families, too many workers are really at the whim of having a good or bad boss. And I think about these issues in this way because I won the Boss Lottery, and in some ways I feel like talking about these issues, raising awareness around these issues, and ultimately making real policy change around these issues is a way for me to pay it forward. So, but really this connects to the economy and what's happening in the economy. And so I'll start off with what we see at the Center for American Progress. And I know a lot of people have heard about rising economic inequality, but I actually think that what's happening in the country, there's this broad mystery in Washington and around the country, which is when we've had, really years of job growth, we're now at a point where we've had 54 straight months of job growth, 10 million new private sector jobs. Yet there's still a lot of economic anxiety, a lot of people really worried about their futures and the futures of their children and the futures of the next generation. So we've really tried to unpack that. Obviously, there's growing inequality in the country, but we've gone through previous periods of inequality. In the 1990s, there was growing inequality. The top 1% was doing much better than everyone else, but everyone was moving up, right? So we've tried to unpack why people are particularly anxious. And I do think that there is a lot of concern about the distance between the top 1% and everybody else. In fact, Forbes just came out with their list of the 400 wealthiest Americans. And there's a record now it used to be that just being a billionaire got you on the list. Now you have to have $1.5 billion. There's plenty of billionaires. There's in fact over 100 billionaires who no longer make the Forbes list because we've created a lot of billionaires in the economy. But as an American, I don't actually get so anxious about that as long as everyone's growing. And the thing that I've become really anxious about is the fact that over the last 4 or 5 years, 95% of the income gains have gone to the top 1%. Let me say that again. 95% of all income gains in the country have gone to the top 1%. What does that translate for the middle class? And I think when people are concerned about economic inequality, they are concerned about the growing top and the growing bottom. You see that in the mayor's race in New York, but also in talk about issues around the country. I think people are worried about that, but more importantly, a bigger focus for people is the challenges to the middle, the struggles of people in the middle themselves. And we have just some facts around those issues that I'd like to share. First fact is that median wages in the country, the sort of number that's it's close to the average wage in the country, the median weekly wage in 2001 was $768 per week. The median weekly wage in 2012, adjusting for inflation, was $768 per week. So we did go up a little, actually in the middle of the 2000s, but we came right back in 2012. So people are Most Americans are actually basically running in place. At the same time, productivity, the amount of output for each hour worked actually went up 25% over that decade. And this has been kind of an axiom of economics that the more productive you are, the higher your wages are. But it's also sort of, as I translate it, into a kind of promise of the American dream. The harder you work, the more productive you are, the more you'll expand opportunity, the more wages you'll get, the more you'll move up. So I think that breakdown, that challenge where people are working harder and making less money, or making the same amount of money, is a real wage challenge that the country faces. But it's not just wages that are driving anxieties. It's the fact that costs are going up as well. So CAP did this analysis. We put out a report last week that got some attention, some press attention, which is that costs have actually risen dramatically for families over the last decade. So a prototypical family making a pretty medium income and have 2 kids, 2 workers, both mother and father working, 2 children in school. Their costs have gone up $10,000 over the last 10 years while their wages have basically stayed the same. And they've gotten some tax benefits, but at home their disposable income has actually reduced $5,000 over the last 10 years. So I think that's what's really driving the anxiety people have. And we can focus on unemployment numbers or the GDP, but until people feel a benefit in their incomes, I think we're going to continue to see a political challenge. And I think but this leaves us with real opportunities of what to do around this set of challenges. And my own view is that, unfortunately, the discussions around this election haven't been so substantive, but I believe the presidential debate that we'll start having in 2015 and 2016 will be one in which these issues are front and center on both sides. Rand Paul started talking about some issues around wages. Others are talking about some issues around wages, but I also think these will be front and center on the Democratic side. Now, I used to work for Hillary Clinton. I worked for her for a very long time. She gave a speech a few months ago on this kind of central challenge of the middle class squeeze. So I think these issues connect in some really fundamental ways. So obviously there are particular ideas like raising the minimum wage, investing in infrastructure. Investing in infrastructure is a good thing to do on its own, and there's bipartisan support for it, but it also helps tighten the labor force. And really over the last several decades, making sure that our unemployment numbers go down to a point where there is wage pressure going up is really critical to ensuring economic growth going forward. And addressing some of these cost drivers. So we found in the report that we did that healthcare costs have gone up $2,000 over the last decade. Child care costs have gone up $2,500 over the last decade. Higher education costs, I don't have to tell folks in this room, higher education costs have gone up. So addressing each of these challenges, healthcare costs, child care costs, higher education costs, can also help middle class families and people struggling to get into the middle class, help them address the squeeze that they're feeling. And I think those are really important issues. So let me just take one set of issues that I think are critical to this discussion, child care and the suite of family economic security issues like paid leave and sick days. So I think these issues really interconnect, because if you look at the one set of policies in which the United States stands out from the rest of the world, literally the rest of the world, it is in issues like paid leave and sick days. So the United States stands out in making its workers bear the responsibilities of having a family solely by themselves. So if you look at Canada, China, Europe, all of our major competitors, they're very much focused on they have a set of policies that make it easier for families who are balancing work and family. So balancing their responsibilities as parents and as workers. So an important fact that we focus on is America's middle class, right? I started talking about that. America's middle class is, according to most experts, no longer the wealthiest middle class in the world. We've been the wealthiest middle class throughout our history, and for the first time in 2011, Canada surpassed us. Now, there's a lot of issues around Canada and other countries, and we think about the challenges around wages really being things like technology and globalization creating downward pressure on wages. But countries like Canada have issues like technology and globalization and somehow weathered these storms a lot easier. And I think part of the reason why they've done that is because they invest in kids 0 to 5, and also parents don't bear those responsibilities just by themselves. So paid leave is a perfect example. I worked on the first FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, which gives 12 weeks of leave to parents, but it's not paid. The United States is the only developed country in the world that offers no paid leave as a matter of federal policy to parents. So what does that mean? I mean, how does that really translate to economic insecurity issues? It means in the United States that there are workers, you're a worker, you're a mother, you've had a child. You have to leave the workforce to take care of your child. You can't stay connected to the workforce unless you have the resources to pay for what is generally really expensive childcare or childcare services or a nanny or any other means. So you're forced as a low-income worker to leave the workforce at a time where we want people to stay inside. So I think those issues, childcare, pre-K, early learning, are all ways in which they haven't really been connected to the economic debate, but I think they will grow in importance as women's issues become more front and center. We had an event just a few weeks ago at CAP with Hillary Clinton and Rosa DeLauro, Kirsten Gillibrand, Senator from New York, Leader Pelosi. And the focus there was really on these sets of issues, how economic issues make the difference around economic security issues make the difference for families. And we had a fantastic woman there named Shantae Jones, who was 22 when she had her first child. She had 3 kids, had to leave college, but then got support from Maryland. She was from Maryland, from the state of Maryland, for childcare. So she was able to graduate from college, go back to school, and also had help on childcare so that she could find a job, and is now self-sufficient, makes a good middle income. She was unfortunately, from her perspective, she was a single mom, but she was able to do those things because we invested in childcare. And other countries, Canada, every other country, offers help for parents so that parents don't bear that burden just by themselves. And in an economy now where most women are working, I think it's really imperative that we think through how these issues are not just good for individual workers, but they're important for our economy as a whole. So with that, I've talked a long time. I really want to be able to answer questions. So I'm looking forward to your questions. And I have a policy that if people don't have questions, I just call on people. So, I hope you won't make me be reduced to that, but I'm happy to do it if I'm forced. Thank you.
Neera, thank you for being here.
Thanks. Honored to be here. Oh, wow, that's really turned on.
A small institution like ours, like Concordia, we really day in and day out face what it is that you're talking about, that is the middle class being squished. We strongly believe that higher education is one of the few reliable ladders of social mobility that is still left in this country. However, making that ladder of social mobility accessible to the kind of population that we serve is becoming increasingly more difficult. On the one hand, the cost of producing one of these graduates is skyrocketing, and it's not as if we are just being, out of hand. Are there any policy solutions that we can think about that would alleviate the pain that middle-class families are experiencing, sending these young men and women to college so that they do have access to that ladder of social mobility?
So first of all, I really want to applaud Concordia as a place that has been open to students of all backgrounds. And increasingly so many institutions of higher education have become sort of a byproduct of inequality, right?
Thank you.
They basically, they're disproportionately the children of elite. They ensure that, and they offer a great resource. People graduate, they get high-paying jobs, but then the whole thing is kind of replicating. So it's really important. As a graduate, I went to a private law school, Yale Law School, but I went to a public university, UCLA, which is also still has a record of really being open to the middle class and folks who are trying to get into the middle class. And these institutions that do that that have those kinds of policies are so critical to ensuring economic opportunity. I really think there's a variety of really education across the board, higher education, K through 12, and 0 to 5 are all the ways in which we have proven examples of addressing opportunity, right? That's in our history, those are the best ways that we've done it. And so there's policies that work on either end, right? So in terms of making it more affordable, there are a range of policies that we've supported on student debt, loan forgiveness, those sets of issues. But I do think that we have to explore sort of direct support for universities that are doing the work of ensuring that there's opportunity for all economic classes, really. And so, we've explored ideas with the Department of Education around support for public and private universities, particularly in difficult economic times. So thinking about, in an economic recession, ensuring opportunity is a sort of counter-cyclical. So in an economic recession, helping universities more directly support services, because what's particularly terrible is right when people are getting hit the hardest, let's say we're in a recession, then universities, public and private, face huge pressures to constrict, right? To get higher income students, people who can pay full tuition. That's the opposite of what we want to do. So those are some ideas we're focused on, which are kind of out of, they're out of sort of the box of what people are traditionally talking about.
But that's not in the mainstream at all, right? I mean, will we ever see a day when there might be direct subsidies to institutions like ours that's working in the trenches?
Yeah, so I actually think, I think there's increasing focus on ladders of opportunity. I think people, the president gave a speech today. I think a lot of people are anxious. It's not like my closest friend, but Eric Cantor, who was the House Republican Majority Leader, before he got primaried, did a major speech on economic opportunity and wage pressure and the challenges middle-class families are facing. I think people recognize, and there's bipartisan support for recognition of the role universities, higher education plays. I do think that as we focus more on issues around opportunity, there's more of a space for that. I know that there's a lot of interest in how to help public institutions and institutions that are really servicing, everyone in their communities.
I'll ask one more question and then pass it on. As you know, our mayor signed the executive order on the living wages.
Yes. I worked with Bill de Blasio on Hillary's campaign, so I know. Is that who you were saying you were mayor?
Yes. Mary is here.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think I met the mayor. I think I met your mayor.
My hometown mayor, but you know what I mean, right? Do you see this happening any other places? Is this the beginning of a groundswell? Is this sort of one-off out in the...
Increases in the minimum wage and living wage issues are moving relatively quickly at the local level. So Seattle actually just did $15 an hour. San Diego just did and San Diego is a pretty conservative place. They just did paid sick days. New York has did the living wage proposal. Los Angeles is doing a minimum wage increase. San Francisco's already done one. Boston is going to do one. States have passed minimum wage increases. Arkansas has a minimum wage increase on the ballot in November. Arkansas is not a very progressive state, but has a minimum wage that looks like has very strong support. So, I think the minimum wage is a kind of perfect example of an issue that has very strong bipartisan support. When you look at polling, 60% of Republicans support it. But in Washington, like a lot of issues, it's just become, unfortunately, highly polarized. It's very hard to pass things. We developed this proposal for universal pre-K, really taking what a lot of states had done, states that had Republican governors. Oklahoma is a perfect example of a state that's always had conservative governors, had a universal pre-K proposal. It's had huge impact by third grade. Kids across the board, their ability to read on grade had moved up 25%. Their math scores have moved up 15%. So, that was a bipartisan issue. And in Washington, we can't get any bipartisan traction, even though it's Republican governors leading. And that's, we did an event with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, not like any liberal group or anything. And it was hard for that. They couldn't get a Republican governor. So I'm hopeful minimum wage and other issues are issues that you'll see move at the local level, even if they don't pass at the federal level. But I'm hopeful some point the fever will break in Washington one way or the other. And hopefully we'll be able to pass something.
Questions? I don't want to hog this, so just please.
Yes, thank you for that talk. And I was noticing Center for American Progress here. There must be some explanation that people are giving about why, for instance, Canada passed through the middle class. And there's also the idea of have we declined, or are they just doing things better than we are? What are some of the factors that enter into this that make us where we are? We've always prided ourselves as middle class. So what is the general consensus why things are failing?
So I think, I think one of the challenges is that in the United States, there's just less pressure. There's less pressure on wages, right? So a good example is it's both in the supply and demand side, if I can use economic terms. So, in other countries, they have higher rates of unionization, and the unions can demand higher wages. So Canada has 25% unionization rate. We're at 12%. Germany is at a 75% unionization rate. They have workers' councils that are so union representatives serve on boards of firms. Like if you go to Daimler Chrysler or any of their companies, they have unions who are they have union labor reps on their workers' boards. Now, I will say that the unions, because they have stronger, there's more of them, they have more concentration. Sometimes they operate much more in alliance with firms, and in the US sometimes they're in greater conflict with firms. But I think that's part of the fact that we have such low unionization rates. But also, one thing we've been looking at in Canada is, their tax system is a little bit more equitable. There's fewer tax breaks for the wealthy, but also they have very strong education system, really from 0 to 22. So there's more public investment. So they have universal childcare. Like everybody has access to childcare, and then their kids start off first grade better. Their first graders do better than our first graders. So I think it's not one single thing. You have to focus on both the skills as well as the pressures within the country. But what I find interesting about Canada and Germany and other countries where wages have moved up, it's just that in so much of the discussion in Washington or New York it's people just throw their hands up, right? There are these forces in the world like globalization and trade and technology that are really hurting workers. But those countries have managed to ride the waves of change better than we have. And they're not like libertarian states or something, they're generally more progressive on their policies than we are. One could argue less open to, the free market than we are, but they've managed to sort of ride the waves of change that in ways that buffer and support families better than we do.
Unions, there's always been the talk of whether they should have a union shop, and certainly unions and all, but recently we've had that problem in Detroit. I mean, a lot of people feel that unions are so strong, they got so much for the workers, that makes Detroit go under. That's very simplistic, but it's something that says that was a problem.
Yeah, I think the things with pensions in cities, and this is a huge problem. What really happened with pensions in cities, Detroit, Rhode Island, other places, is in New York City, some of the challenges is that for a long time it was easier to pay, instead of providing salary increases, mayors, and lots of mayors, bipartisan mayors. Rudy Giuliani did this, as well as every Democrat in Detroit offered pension increases. So public employee workers basically didn't get wage increases, but they were promised something in their pensions. And those were unaffordable promises made, right, that people are paying for now. But it's not like those workers, what I feel a little bit badly about is those workers made a deal to get something in the future in exchange for giving up something now. And that's really the challenge and sort of depressing point of Detroit. Now, I'm not saying unions are perfect, right? They have to be more interested in wage increases than work rules. They have to be more flexible. But I do think right now what's happening is you talk to a company and, the CEO of GE, and he'll tell you there's not much pressure to increase wages. But, the challenge in the United States is we're 70% consumption economy. So we really depend on people being able to buy goods, right? Walmart today comes out with a report that it's worried about its future sales in the United States because they don't have enough customers. Well, why don't they have enough customers, right? Because wages are down, So I think this is a challenge that we all have, and it's about raising our economic, people have to think about it as in the economic benefit of the country.
Yeah, go ahead, right in the middle.
There's a factor that I think is very, very important that we haven't addressed. Immigration. Massive illegal immigrants. We just had this summer, what was about 22,000 children who were smuggled into the United States from Honduras, Guatemala, not even from Mexico. They didn't want to stay in Mexico, they wanted the United States. All the other countries that you mentioned are not a target for immigration the way we are. They want our country. Turkish workers did want Germany, and Germany wanted them after World War II. They needed them. But it's not as massive. We're coping with an immigration problem that is staggering. And if there are people in the audience, for example, who are teachers, and a system that gets a large number of immigrants, we know what happens in a classroom. Your figures are not going to look particularly pretty. The statistics will not show you being at the top. And in comparison, let's say with Canada, which has some immigration, but nothing like ours.
Yeah, Canada has actually a much more open immigration policy. So this is I'm so glad you asked this question because this is a great area for additional facts. So in terms of the children coming across the border, 74% of the immigrants from the countries that were facing the problems went to other countries, not the US. So we got 26% of the children who were crossing the border. The rest went to the other parts of Central America. So Mexico actually took the lion's share of the kids, but they went to other parts, even South America. So it wasn't just the United States that took the lion's share of those kids. It was really other countries. So that's an important just fact to have. You know, I think what's been really helpful in the debate around immigration has been more of the economic analysis around these issues. And if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, which is the neutral arbiter for Congress, or economic analysis by the Joint Center or Harvard's economists, I think the truth is that immigrants have actually, and I know it's hard to see in some parts of the country, but immigrants have actually been an economic benefit to the country, and really over the long term are hugely important, because Germany, Europe are facing real stagnation around growing their population. They have more and more older people that they can't support with their population. Because we have immigrants who are actually paying into Social Security and Medicare, those are the taxes they do pay. We are not facing the economic loss in the future that those countries face. Now, it is true that by having so many undocumented workers, that does create downward pressure on wages. So that is why actually legalizing people who've been here for a long time, while strengthening the border so it's not easy for people to come across, is an economic boon, and why the Congressional Budget Office, as well as other economists, have shown that if we do that, that helps raise wages, it fights this downward pressure on wages, it actually helps raise wages, and would increase our GDP and lower the deficit at the same time. That's why we've had some bipartisan support for issues like immigration reform in the long haul.
I see a lot of hands going up. Before I call on these hands, any student hands back there?
I'll call on a student.
I don't, since before I give it away to a non-student hand, I just wanted to make sure that there were some student hands. Well, there isn't one yet.
All right.
There isn't one yet. So keep thinking about it before I come back to. So go ahead.
It seems to me that large numbers of Americans are voting against their economic interests. The richest states are blue, the poorest states are red. This seems to go against common sense, and I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I don't know, Kansas might switch any minute now, but you know, to be 100% honest, I think that I think people do not think just in terms of their economic interests. You know, I mean, you're right, blue states, the truth about blue states is they are more progressive, they're taxed at a higher rate. Blue states send more to Washington than they give back. New York sends, it used to be, when I was Hillary Clinton's legislative director, it used to be like $1.40. I don't know what it is now. For every dollar it received, it sent $1.40 in. States like Texas take a lot more from the federal government than they give back. They take a lot more in entitlements than they pay out in taxes. But you know, I mean, we struggled with this on the Affordable Care Act itself, because the Affordable Care Act provides health care to a lot of red states. The highest rates of uninsurance are southern states. But you know, my view is the difference between the United States and Europe. You know, we do a lot of work at our think tank on states like the issues in Europe, and you look at the Middle East, other parts of the world where nation states are disaggregating. What I think is really important about the country, it sounds very hokey, is that I care about how a kid in California is doing or how kids in Texas are doing, and we are knitted together as a nation, and it's important for us to do that. Now, I recognize it's kind of annoying, right? As a blue state, it's kind of annoying that, you know, people are using, you know, we're going through these Medicaid fights, and these states are losing out totally, right? But I think over time, it's more important that we feel a character as a nation than you know, thinking of this as one state giving to another.
I'm being timed out, so Mike, you had a hand up there.
Very quick, again, Neera, thank you very much for both great presentation, especially the emphasis that you and CAP does on the bipartisan things that work together. And so I'll ask you the political question on the Affordable Care Act that affects some of the students in the audience and others. Here we have a progressive president having a very progressive piece of legislation with the economic inequality that you described, and much of the way that it's paid for, instead of taxing those that have benefited over the past 4 years, as you cited, is by getting 25 to 35-year-old healthy people to sign up to be part of the pool. How, if a progressive president does that, how can there be political vote for other kinds of proposals?
So, I mean, most of the funding for the Affordable Care Act and the levels of subsidy actually come from the tax on higher income. So the Medicare 3% surtax, which is on millionaires and above. So, as well as savings in the Medicare program, which is a lot of greater efficiencies that have actually led to lower medical inflation overall. So, I mean, I think that, and this is like a values question like everything else, you know, I think that young people should be insured because, you know, the truth is if a young person gets sick or gets into a car accident, we're all going to pay for that person regardless. And the young person who goes into healthcare now, and they have pretty good affordable healthcare options for young people, but when they get into the insurance pool themselves, you know, that same insurance pool is a very good deal for when they get older, right? So I don't think of young people as just as young people for one point in their lives and they never get older. It's a continuum, and it's, maybe you see it as not the best deal when you're younger, but it gets to be a better deal when you're older. And the truth is, the problem with healthcare and the problem with the healthcare system is whether you're in it or not, people pay for your healthcare. You know, that is the essential challenge, is people are uninsured. We all pay for the uninsured, right, in the most inefficient, ineffective way, which is in the emergency room visit. And what's been, you know, a hopeful sign about the Affordable Care Act is that it's covering lots of people. It's coming in cheaper. CBO has shown it's cheaper than its projected cost. Premiums are lower. There's still a lot of challenges. I'm not saying like the thing's perfect by any stretch, and I hope we get to a place where we can actually talk about fixes, because that I do think is an important thing to do. Fortunately, now
One
I
more
think,
question.
Okay, great.
She has a flight to catch, and that's why.
Oh yeah, but you look student-like, so I'm.
So you spoke briefly before about the lack of unionization and how we are a little bit more friendly to free markets than Canada. Could you be a little bit more explicit about large corporations and kind of what their role is and whether or not legislation is passed in Washington? Kind of the role of lobbyists a little bit and whether or not they're working with the people's interests and how that all is working in your experience.
We'll try to do that in 1 minute or less. No, so, I mean, like Washington is overrun by special interests. I mean, you know, I mean, it sounds hokey, but what I like about my job is that I don't, you know, like I don't work for a special interest, so I can actually work on public policy. That's good. I mean, I would say there are a lot of lobbyists, and there are a lot of like lobbyists who argue for one side versus another. In a lot of these debates, however, there's so many special interests, it's almost hard to just pick a side. The one thing I would say, and I know that there are probably supporters and opponents of the Affordable Care Act in this room, but I would say that my experience in legislation is it is definitely hard to get things done in Washington, no doubt about it. But I think people, you know, in the world of like House of Cards and other things have like such a cynical view of Washington. And I've had experience with numerous legislators who are really just trying to do the right thing and just are trying to mediate what that is. The Affordable Care Act was a political loser from like the 4th month on, right? No one thought they were gonna like win an election by passing that bill. But it was a tenet of the Democratic Party to actually try to address healthcare coverage. And I would say, and my only disagreement maybe with your question is, you know, Democrats had been pursuing single payer for a long time, and they thought of this as a kind of free market answer, because it's all private insurance, to address this challenge. And people were honestly, the vast majority of members I interacted with were trying to do the right thing. Many of them lost their seats, and they knew they could lose their seats, and they did it anyway. And they didn't think of that as like a political winner for them. They still did it. And I just hope that people, I think we definitely live in a cynical age. I'm on social media, like everything gets blown up really quickly. Everyone looks at everyone's motives. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle, now they just have different values of how to get there, who are trying to do the right thing. And unfortunately, with the rise of primaries and external institutions like super PACs, there's been a lot more kind of opposition to getting things done, but members themselves, most members themselves find that very frustrating. They don't embrace it. And unfortunately, I think I have to catch a plane.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks, John.
That was great.
Oh, good. I'm glad I didn't humiliate you. Thank you. Ooh, I'm going to catch this.
Thank you all. I know she has a flight to catch, and so she's heading out the door. So thank you.